While one really important, and I mean one really important good thing happened to this Dolphins organization this past offseason, and that, of course, was the dismissal, the firing of head coach Adam Gase. If the Jets are dumb enough to want him, let them have him. Because you knew already it was time for him to move on. That was the good news. Bring in another member of the Belichick coaching tree, relative to the rest of the league who's done that and hasn't seen a whole lot of success with that, in Brian Flores. And jury was kind of out on that move. You could see where you could potentially cut the mustard, but then you see the resume of the Belichick coaching tree guys and you start to worry about it. But more so than that, 2020 or 2019, excuse me, was looking to really be shaping up of a year for significant transition for this Miami Dolphins team. And frankly, looking very much like it was going to be a full-on tank job, even in the offseason. Ryan Tannehill was gone after 7 seasons with the organization, the former 8th overall pick out of Texas A&M. Never really worked out to the level that Dolphins fans certainly hoped it was going to. They brought in Ryan Fitzpatrick. Yay, Fitzmagic. They made the trade to bring in Josh Rosen. Yay, maybe you got the future guy until you don't. But then you're looking at this team and you're saying, okay, new coach, roster is not very good. This feels like a situation where this team is going to be in tank for TUA mode all year. And they certainly kind of put their stamp out there that this is exactly what they were going after with the Laramie Tunsil trade before the season began. You take a guy that was a 13th overall pick in the 2016 draft that's a left tackle, and you trade him off for a couple of future first-round picks. That's not something a contending team is going to do. That's not something a team that's trying to win this year is going to do. The Dolphins weren't trying to win this year, hence you make a deal like they did to get rid of Laramie Tunsil, which certainly moved them to the front of the line of the conversation of those teams that were trying to, at that time at least, tank for TUA, trying to get to that number 1 overall pick in the 2020 NFL Draft. And based off of the early season results, it certainly didn't look like there was anything that was going to happen to change that. You had that early season Minka Fitzpatrick trade, which you look at it and you say the Dolphins were going to play him a bunch of different places. He wanted to play at one position, and he wanted to try and excel there. It was the best thing that could happen for Minka Fitzpatrick in his career, going to the Pittsburgh Steelers, getting the first-round pick back from the Steelers in return. And you took a guy that was the 11th overall pick in 2018 and flipped him into a lower pick in 2020. Not exactly the way you want to play the game, if you know what I mean. First, they start off with Ryan Fitzpatrick, which again didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. You traded for Josh Rosen. You need to find out what the kid can or cannot do as quickly as possible because it might help shape your upcoming offseason plans. You're not contending anyway, so what the hell do you get out of playing Ryan Fitzpatrick? Screams to me a bit of desperation for a new coach trying to establish himself and protect his job. I understand it and I get it, but is that necessarily the best thing for the organization long term? But then after a couple of weeks where they were getting blown out anyways, then they went to Josh Rosen. He got some looks. It didn't look good, so they went back to Ryan Fitzpatrick. 0-7 start to the season. Then mixed in there, you've got the Kenyon Drake trade. So this team was just looking for reasons to lose at this point, is what it felt like. But then, over the last 9 games, dare I say, there was a little bit of Fitzmagic. Fitzpatrick took over, and he was the unquestioned starter the rest of the year. The Miami Dolphins, believe it or not, won 5 of their last 9 games. Like, how crazy is this? They intentionally set out to tank, and you can't look at their moves and the way they were set up and think they were doing anything other than that. And you still tanked to a certain degree. I mean, they ended up with the 5th overall pick in this year's draft and got 2 other first-round picks to boot. But they didn't get to number 1. They won 5 of their last 9 games with a roster that is not good at all. And it could have been even better for this team in terms of the 1-loss record because they had 1-point losses to both the Redskins and the Jets. So you could be potentially talking about a Dolphins team based off of everything that happened that would have won 6 or 7 games. To me, that is a direct reflection of Brian Flores and his talents as a head coach, especially considering the situation the organization was clearly trying to tank. Players were wanting out, and even players that weren't planning on trading were sitting there and squabbling about whether or not they wanted to be a part of this. And lo and behold, what do you know? The whole trajectory of everything changed as the season plays out, which is interesting considering they finally got a first-round pick caliber type of season out of Devontae Parker and rewarded him with a contract extension, which is very good to see. Even that, especially once you traded away Kenyon Drake, they really didn't have much of a running game. Ryan Fitzpatrick ended up being the team's leading rusher. Think about that, how awesome that is, that Fitzmagic is the team's leading rusher. Unfortunately for them, still on defensively, they struggled mightily, 30th in total yards allowed. One positive you could take away from all of that, this was a team trying not to be good. They weren't very good, but they still won some games, and they played more snaps with rookies than anybody else in the league. They had more rookies play more snaps than anybody else in the league. Just because guys are young doesn't automatically mean that's going to translate to being good, but at least you could say that you bit the bullet in 2020 or 2019, excuse me, and set yourself up very, very well for 2020 and beyond. Now, looking ahead, a couple of key things. First, Xavier Howard and his domestic violence arrest. How's that going to play out? What's going to happen here? And even if we assume eventually that the charges are dropped, you're looking at potentially a 6-game suspension from the league in 2020. Not exactly ideal as you're thinking about Xavier Howard being one of the kind of building blocks and foundation pieces for this Miami Dolphins rebuilding project. Then you look at Josh Rosen. The Cardinals had him for a year, said, nah, we good. We want Kyler Murray. Passed him off to the Dolphins. Dolphins had him for a few starts, said, nah, we good. We want to play the journeyman that's not going to be the long-term guy in Fitzmagic. So will Josh Rosen be moved? There's certainly a possibility. Will Josh Rosen be cut? Frankly, I think that could be a possibility. For those that are talking about, well, we got to bring in Josh Rosen, think about it like this. 2 different teams have had the chance to look at him the past 2 years and relatively quickly made the decision, it's a no for me, dog. Just think about that. And what does that tell you? What does that mean? Now, looking back at this past season, their 2019 draft class, I didn't really get a ton out of it. Like Christian Wilkins didn't exactly put up great numbers, but I still think he's one of those character guys, one of those talents that you want to have in your organization that you want to build around. He's a winner. He's a leader. His best football's ahead of him. He's going to be a long-term starter, and I think a good one. Michael Dieter, I think he's also going to be a long-term starter. So at least they found some talent in the trenches, which you're always looking for in the league, but they didn't exactly get the most in terms of pure contributions out of this draft class. That said, though, you're on to the next phase of the rebuilding project, which really accelerates here in 2020 for this Miami Dolphins team. In terms of cap space, they're sitting at over $90 million. So if they want to go and make a splash and sign some big-name guys and add some talent to the roster, some veterans to the roster to assist and accelerate that rebuilding project, they most certainly can do so, and I would expect them to do that to some degree. In terms of their own free agents, you've got to keep Talib, Evan Boehm, Walt Aikens, Vince Beagle. You might see them bring back a couple of those guys, but it's not earth-shattering if they let all of them go. They might bring all of them back. Who knows? But what's really going to matter the most for this Miami Dolphins team is this upcoming NFL draft, because this is what they've been pointing to. This has been what everything has been leading up to. You've got 3 first-round picks. You've got the 5th overall pick, the 18th overall pick from Pittsburgh, and then you got wherever Houston's first-round pick is going to end up. Not to mention you've got Houston's first-round pick in the 2021 draft. Then you've got 2 second-round picks, picks 39 and 62. You've got a third-round pick, 2 fifths, 3 sixths, a 7th. Like, there's a ton of draft pick capital here for the Miami Dolphins, which they can utilize to potentially get some real difference makers for the team and also to try and even more strengthen their position in that 2021 draft, which is something I would advise them to do to go along with that additional first-round pick that they have from the Houston Texans. So it's kind of a twofold approach to me for the draft for the Dolphins. They need to find guys that can be the start of something and be the accelerant to the next step of this rebuilding project for the Dolphins. But they also need to try and strengthen their position in future drafts. Don't blow your wad all in one draft. If you can improve your position in 2021 or even 2022, then that's what you've got to do as well. Trying to balance out those 2 needs will be critical for this Dolphins front office in this offseason to come. In terms of their team needs, obviously the number 1 need is the quarterback. They do not have the long-term answer in their organization. You would assume that they are definitely going to be looking at that position here, whether that ends up being that they get lucky and Joe Burrow falls to him perhaps, or they trade up to go get a Joe Burrow. Not likely based off the way things are right now, but you never know. Stranger things can happen. It's ironic for the Dolphins fans that were kind of wigging out and freaking out about this team winning too many games at the end of the season where they're going to end up with the 5th overall pick. Realistically, if Tua declares, Tua should be there. If they want him, they can probably just take him. And with the draft pick capital that they do have, if they got worried about somebody jumping up ahead of them to maybe the Giants pick at number 4 or the Lions pick at number 3, even though I think it would be very unlikely that Gettleman will trade down. It's not really his style. They have the draft pick capital to move up 1, 2, or 3 spots and have it not really significantly impact them. If Tua's their guy or Herbert's their guy, they can get out of there with their guy. No matter what, I think the Dolphins are going to get a quarterback with that first pick. I'd be very surprised if they didn't, but again, stranger things could happen. But with those other 2 first-round picks, you could be looking at really building up that offensive infrastructure around whatever one young quarterback you end up settling out with in this 2020 draft. You look at left tackle, you got to still replace Laremy Tunsil. You look at running back, you had no running game at all this year. Again, Ryan Fitzpatrick was your leading rusher. Good thing is that running back doesn't have to be a position you address in the first round. But let's say with Houston's first-round pick that you've got, if you really like one of the running backs, a J.K. Dobbins, a Jonathan Taylor, a Swift, an Etienne, if you like one of those guys, it's part of the luxury of having those first-round picks is you can overdraft a guy slightly to fit your needs. I still think even with Devontae Parker having a nice kind of coming into his own year in 2019, they still need help at wide receiver. Obviously, their defense was really, really bad, and you could argue they need help all over the place, specifically at edge rusher, on the outside. You could talk about in the secondary, specifically at corner, especially depending upon what happens with Xavier Howard and his domestic violence arrest. That said, though, if you're going to draft a young quarterback, which you would most certainly expect the Miami Dolphins to do at some point in time in some way in this draft, then the emphasis must be on surrounding him with as much help on the offensive side of the ball as possible. It's been over 2 decades since Dan Marino last suited up for the Miami Dolphins. And the reality is this organization has never really truly recovered. The best way for them to recover is find that new quarterback for that new generation, for that new era for the Miami Dolphins organization and their fan base. So that way you can put Dan Marino in the past and focus on the here, now, and beyond.